I spent 3 years fighting cancer. Not a single family member showed up. Not my son, not my deal, not even my grandson. But out of nowhere, my deal appeared at my brand new $2 million beach house I had inherited from my brother. When I opened the door, I calmly spoke 3 words. Before we continue, I just want to say thank you for taking time to hear my story. If you're comfortable, let me know where you're listening from, and what time it is where you are. Now let me tell you my story. The final day of my war was a quiet one. There were no trumpets, no parades, only the soft rhythmic beeping of the infusion pump, as the last drops of chemical salvation dripped into my veins. For 3 years this chair, this room, this sterile beige world had been my battlefield. I, Vivian Sterling, a 65-year-old retired middle school teacher, had become a soldier in a war I never signed up for, fighting for the simple, profound privilege of seeing another sunrise. The head nurse, a kind round-faced woman named Patricia, came over and unhooked me for the last time. Her smile was wide and genuine. "That's it, Viv," she said, her voice full of a warmth that had often been the only comfort in this cold place. "You did it. You're done. Time to ring that bell." She gestured toward the small brass bell mounted on a plaque by the door. It was a tradition, a declaration of victory. Patients on their last day of treatment would ring it, its cheerful peal echoing through the ward, a sound of hope for those still in the fight. I had watched dozens of others do it, their faces a mixture of relief and tearful joy, surrounded by beaming family members holding balloons and flowers. Today the room was empty. There were no balloons, no flowers. There was only the vast, deafening silence of my own solitude. I looked at the bell, at its shiny, expectant surface, and I felt nothing. No joy, no relief, only a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. Ringing it would have been a lie. A victory is something you share. I had won this war entirely on my own. "Not today, Patricia," I said, my voice a dry rasp. "I think I'll just go home." Her smile faltered, replaced by a look of deep professional sympathy. She understood. She had seen the empty visitor's chair beside me for 3 long years. The 3 years had been a slow, quiet amputation of my heart. The first cut had been the diagnosis: stage 3 ovarian cancer. The words had fallen from the oncologist's lips and shattered the peaceful, predictable world of my retirement. The second cut came an hour later when I called my son Marcus. I remembered the call with a clarity that still had the power to take my breath away. I was sitting in my car in the hospital parking garage, the sterile informational pamphlet from the doctor's office trembling in my hand. Marcus was a corporate manager, always busy, always climbing. I had timed the call for his lunch break. "Hey Mom," he'd answered, his voice distracted, the sound of keyboard clicks in the background. "Is everything okay? I've only got a minute. I'm in the middle of a deadline." I have some news, baby," I'd stammered, the words catching in my throat. "I just came from the doctor. They found something. It's cancer." The silence on the other end was not the shocked, horrified silence of a loving son. It was the impatient, calculating silence of a busy man, whose schedule had just been disrupted. "Oh," he'd said finally. "Just that? Okay. Well, that's tough. Look, I'm really swamped right now. Let me free up some bandwidth this evening and we can circle back on this. Just hang in there, okay? Circle back, bandwidth." He had spoken to his mother, who had just been handed a death sentence, in the cold, sterile language of a corporate memo. He had not asked if I was scared. He had not asked what he could do. He had scheduled me in, a problem to be dealt with later. That was the day I learned that my son, the boy whose scraped knees I had bandaged and whose fevers I had cooled, was a stranger to me. The cuts kept coming. My daughter-in-law Sasha, a stylish, social media-obsessed realtor, had called once, her voice a symphony of synthetic sympathy. "Vivian, we are just devastated," she'd said. "We're praying for you. Let us know if you need anything." It was a hollow, meaningless offer, the kind you make when you have no intention of ever following through. A week later, while I was recovering from my first brutal round of chemotherapy, my hair already falling out in clumps, she had posted a series of beaming photographs on her Instagram account. Her Marcus and my grandson Jamal, on a spontaneous ski trip to Aspen. The caption read, "Family is everything. Making memories with my boys. Blessed." I had looked at that picture, at their smiling, carefree faces against the backdrop of a winter wonderland, and I had felt a loneliness so profound it was like a physical entity, a cold, heavy presence in the room with me. The worst cut of all, the one that had severed the last hopeful thread, was the surgery. A full hysterectomy, a brutal invasive procedure that left me weak and in agony. I had woken up in the recovery room, my world a blurry haze of pain. The first thing I saw was the empty visitor's chair beside my bed. The nurse told me my son had called. He had a big presentation at work he couldn't get out of. He sent his love, he would try to stop by over the weekend. He never came. That was the day I stopped waiting. I stopped checking my phone for calls that would never come. I stopped scrolling through Sasha's social media feed. A masochistic ritual of self-torture. I accepted the silence. I accepted that I was on my own. My family, the people I had poured my entire life into, had looked at my greatest crisis and had decided it was an inconvenience. So I fought. I endured the nausea, the pain, the fear, the endless, lonely nights. I fought for myself, and I had won. But the woman who walked out of that infusion center, frail and gaunt but alive, was not the same woman who had walked in 3 years ago. That woman, the soft, trusting, ever-hopeful mother and grandmother, had died somewhere along the way. In her place was a survivor, a woman who had learned to live on her own terms, a woman whose heart was scarred over but beating with a new, hard-won strength. A week after my final treatment, as I was slowly, methodically trying to piece my life back together in my small, quiet Atlanta home, the phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, a San Francisco area code. I almost didn't answer. I had become wary of the outside world, but something made me pick it up. The voice on the other end was a lawyer. He informed me that my older brother Walter Bishop had passed away. The news was another blow, but a familiar one. Walter and I had been close once, but his career as a world-renowned architect had taken him to the other side of the country, and our lives had drifted apart. He was a notoriously private man, a brilliant, eccentric bachelor, who had poured all of his passion into his work. We spoke on the phone a few times a year, our conversations filled with the comfortable affection of a shared history. He had known I was sick. He had been the only one. He hadn't been able to visit. His own health was failing, a fact he had downplayed, but he had found his own way to be there for me. "Mrs. Sterling," the lawyer said, his voice gentle, "your brother made some arrangements before he passed. He was aware of your medical situation. He was very concerned about your financial well-being. It was then that I understood. For the past 3 years, on the first of every month, a cashier's check for $5,000 had appeared in my mailbox. It was always anonymous, sent from a holding company I didn't recognize. It was the money that had kept me afloat, the money that had paid for the medications my insurance wouldn't cover, the money that had allowed me to keep my home. It had been Walter. My quiet, distant brother had been my silent guardian angel all along. He has named you as the sole heir to his estate," the lawyer continued, "the centerpiece of which is his private residence in the Outer Banks of North Carolina. It's a new construction. He designed it himself. The property has been appraised at just over $2 million. The words like my diagnosis seem to belong to another language, another reality. $2 million. A beach house. I, Vivian Sterling, who had been subsisting on a teacher's pension and the secret charity of her brother, was now a wealthy woman. There was nothing left for me in Atlanta. The city was a ghost town of painful memories. A month later, after the preliminary paperwork was signed, I packed my few belongings, sold the house that had been my lonely prison, and drove east, toward the sea. The house, when I saw it, took my breath away. It was not a house, it was a work of art, tucked away on a remote stretch of coastline. It was a stunning modern masterpiece of glass, cedar and steel, perched on stilts above the shifting sands. It seemed to float between the sky and the sea. The walls were almost entirely glass, offering a panoramic, godlike view of the wild, churning Atlantic. The interior was a symphony of clean lines, natural light, and a profound, monastic quiet. On the large, minimalist kitchen island, a single, sealed envelope was waiting for me. It was addressed to Viv, in my brother's familiar architectural script. My hands trembled as I opened it. "My dearest Vivian," the letter began. "If you are reading this, it means I am gone. And you have survived. I knew you would. You are the strongest person I have ever known. I am sorry I could not be there with you through your battle, but I was fighting one of my own. I have left you my final project. I designed it for you. I pictured you here watching the sunrise, healing, breathing in the salt air. I wanted to build you a fortress of solitude, a place where the world and its foolish, cruel people could not touch you. Live here, be peaceful, be free. You've earned it. All my love, Walter." Tears streamed down my face as I read the letter. This house wasn't an inheritance. It was a gift. A sanctuary built by the only person in the world who had truly seen me, who had truly loved me. I stood in the vast light-filled living room, the sound of the ocean a powerful rhythmic heartbeat, and for the first time in 3 long agonizing years, I felt a flicker of something I had thought was lost to me forever. I felt a flicker of peace. My daughter-in-law Sasha discovered my new life the way she discovered everything, online, as a high-end realtor in the competitive Atlanta market. She spent hours a day scrolling through public property records, tax assessments, and deed transfers, always hunting for the next big sale. It was a Tuesday morning when she stumbled upon it. She had been searching for comps for a client's property in a wealthy suburb when, on a whim, she decided to run a search on my name. She wasn't expecting to find anything. In her mind, I was still Vivian Sterling, the sick retired teacher living in a modest bungalow, a woman whose primary asset was a mountain of medical debt. The result that flashed on her screen made her drop her artisanal latte. A deed transfer, recorded just 1 week prior. Grantor, the estate of Walter Bishop, grantee Vivian Sterling. Property description: a 5,000 square foot new construction on a double lot of prime oceanfront property in the Outer Banks, North Carolina. Assessed value $2.1 million. For a long stunned moment she just stared at the screen, the numbers seeming to glow with a malevolent impossible light. The sick old woman, the inconvenient, burdensome mother-in-law she and Marcus had so skillfully avoided for 3 years. The woman they had assumed would quietly and conveniently fade away, had not only survived but had somehow, impossibly, become a multimillionaire. The news spread through their perfect curated household, like a fire. I can imagine the phone call to my son, her voice a high-pitched shriek of disbelief and a dawning, avaricious excitement. "Marcus, you are not going to believe this. Your mother, she's rich." The narrative shifted in an instant. The sick old woman who had been too much of a downer to visit, too much of a burden to call, was miraculously, instantly transformed. She was no longer a problem to be avoided, she was an asset to be acquired. The last 3 years of silence, of cruel calculated neglect were immediately and conveniently forgotten, erased by the dazzling beautiful reality of $2 million. Their ambush, when it came, was a masterpiece of manufactured concern. A week after Sasha's discovery, a sleek, black luxury SUV, a vehicle that cost more than my first house, made its way up the long, sandy driveway of my sanctuary. I was sitting on the vast, minimalist deck wrapped in a blanket, watching the gulls wheel and cry over the churning ocean, when the sound of its crunching tires on the crushed shells broke the peaceful silence. The doors opened, and out poured my family. My long-lost, suddenly deeply concerned family. Sasha emerged first, a vision of casual beach-chic elegance in a flowing white linen dress and oversized sunglasses. Marcus followed, looking uncomfortable and out of place in a crisp polo shirt and loafers, a man clearly more at home in a boardroom than on a beach. And trailing behind them, his face buried in his phone, was my grandson Jamal, a lanky, sullen 16-year-old, who had not bothered to call his grandmother once during her 3-year war with death. They came bearing gifts, a ridiculously large bouquet of lilies, the funereal flower of choice, a bottle of expensive champagne and a gift bag from a gourmet food store. They were not arriving for a visit, they were staging an intervention of love, a full-scale assault of affection designed to overwhelm and disarm. I watched them approach from my chair on the deck, my heart a cold, still stone in my chest. I did not get up. I did not smile. The woman who would have once rushed to the door, her heart overflowing with a desperate, grateful love, was gone. The woman who sat there now was a stranger to them, a woman forged in the fires of their neglect. And she was not grateful. She was not hopeful. She was simply waiting. Sasha spotted me and her face broke into a wide, brilliant and utterly fake smile. "Vivian," she called out, her voice a theatrical cry of relief and joy. "Oh my goodness. There you are. We were so worried. We came as soon as we heard you were here all alone. We were just devastated to hear about Walter and then to think of you here all by yourself after everything you've been through." She was a masterful performer. Her voice was thick with a synthetic, syrupy sympathy. She was playing the part of the loving, frantic daughter-in-law, a role she had clearly rehearsed on the long drive from Atlanta. I slowly, deliberately stood up from my chair. My body was still frail, my movements stiff from the lingering effects of the chemotherapy, but I walked toward the front door with a steady, unhurried gait. I met them on the porch, a silent, gaunt figure in a simple cotton dress, my face a blank, unreadable mask. They stood there, their perfect concerned faces arranged in a tableau of loving intervention. Marcus was holding the champagne. Jamal was still looking at his phone. Sasha was the designated spokesperson, her smile so bright it was blinding. She started her speech again, her voice oozing with a concern that was as deep and as wide as the ocean behind me, and just as cold. "Vivian, honey, you look so fragile. We should have been here. We feel just terrible. We wanted to come, of course. But Marcus's work has been so demanding, and with Jamal's school we just didn't want to be a burden on you while you were recovering." The lie was so audacious, so shameless, it was almost impressive. They had repurposed their own neglect, repackaging it as a thoughtful, considerate act. I let her finish. I let the last of her pretty empty words hang in the salt-tinged air. I looked at them, really looked at them, at my son, his eyes shifting uncomfortably, unable to meet my gaze. At my grandson, who hadn't even bothered to look up from his phone, and at my daughter-in-law, her face a perfect beautiful mask of lies. 3 years. 3 years of silence. 3 years of agony. And now, here they stood, on the doorstep of a $2 million house, their arms laden with gifts, their mouths full of a love that had been miraculously resurrected by the scent of money. I took a slow, deep breath, the clean, salt air filling my lungs. I looked directly at my son, then at his wife, then at the boy who was my grandson but was also a stranger, and with a voice that was not angry, not sad, not even hurt, but simply profoundly and devastatingly calm, I spoke 3 words. "Who are you?" The 3 words, spoken so quietly, landed with the force of a physical blow. The air, which had been thick with their manufactured cloying sympathy, was suddenly sucked out of the space between us. They stared at me, their smiles frozen on their faces, their eyes wide with a sudden uncomprehending shock. Sasha's perfectly painted mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Marcus took a half step forward, his face a mask of bewildered confusion. "Mom?" he said, his voice a strained whisper. What are you talking about?" "It's me. It's Marcus, your son." I looked at him, at this handsome, successful man who wore my son's face but was a stranger to my suffering, and I felt nothing. No flicker of recognition, no maternal pull. The cancer had burned all of that away, leaving behind only the cold, hard ash of the truth. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice still unnervingly calm, the voice of a polite stranger making an inquiry. "I don't believe we've met. My son wouldn't have let his mother go through 3 years of hell alone." The blood drained from Marcus's face. He looked as if I had slapped him. Sasha, recovering from her initial shock, quickly recalibrated. Her expression of loving concern morphed into one of deep, pitying sadness. She was, above all else, an actress, and she had just been handed a new, even more dramatic role to play. "Oh my God," she said, her voice a theatrical, horrified whisper. She turned to Marcus, placing a hand on his arm. "Honey, it's the chemo. It's what I was worried about. Chemo brain. It's real. It affects the memory. She doesn't recognize us." She had seized upon my words and twisted them, reframing my deliberate, profound rejection as a tragic symptom of my illness. It was a brilliant sociopathic pivot. She was already building her new narrative, the poor, confused, memory-addled cancer patient who was now, conveniently, a wealthy but incompetent homeowner. Jamal finally looked up from his phone, his face a mixture of teenage boredom and a dawning, uncomfortable confusion. "Grandma," he said, the word sounding foreign and uncertain on his tongue. I turned my calm, steady gaze on him. "I'm sorry, young man," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "But my grandson wouldn't have let his grandmother go through surgery after surgery without a single phone call, a single text message. That woman you're referring to, she waited for that call, she hoped for it, she grieved for it. But I can assure you that woman is a stranger to me." I then looked back at Sasha and Marcus, my eyes as clear and as hard as sea glass. "So you see, you must be mistaken. You seem to have confused me with someone who is still a part of your family. That woman, the mother and grandmother who waited by the phone for 3 years. She's gone. I believe she died quietly, in an empty hospital room, sometime last year." I let the words settle, a quiet, devastating indictment. I was not playing a game. I was telling them the absolute, unequivocal truth of my new reality. The emotional connection they had severed was not something that could be simply reattached with a bouquet of flowers and a fake smile. It was gone, and so was the woman who had held it. "Now," I said, my voice shifting, taking on the crisp, no-nonsense tone of a teacher addressing a group of disruptive students in the hallway. If you'll excuse me, you are strangers on my private property. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." And with that I stepped back inside, my movements unhurried, and closed the heavy, solid cedar door in their shocked, speechless faces. I didn't slam it. I closed it with a quiet final click that echoed the closing of a chapter, the end of a story. I leaned my back against the cool wood of the door, my heart pounding a slow, steady and strangely liberated rhythm. I had spoken my truth, and I was, for the first time in a very long time, completely and utterly free. The aftermath of my rejection was a predictable explosion of righteous indignation and calculated opportunism. Humiliated and furious at being so thoroughly dismissed, Sasha and Marcus immediately shifted from a strategy of feigned affection to one of legal aggression. The day after their disastrous visit, they were on the phone with a lawyer. A week later, a local sheriff's deputy, a young man with a kind but uncomfortable expression, arrived at my door and served me with a thick packet of legal papers. I thanked him, took the documents, and sat down at the large reclaimed wood dining table my brother had designed. With a steady hand, I read the words that were meant to terrify me into submission. They were petitioning the court for an emergency conservatorship. The document was a masterpiece of legal fiction, a carefully constructed narrative of my tragic decline. It painted a picture of a woman ravaged by illness, her mind and memory severely compromised by aggressive chemotherapy treatments. Their primary piece of evidence, the cornerstone of their entire case, was my clear and profound cognitive decline and amnesia, as evidenced by my failure to recognize my own son and grandson. The petition went on to state that, in my confused and vulnerable state, I was incapable of managing my newly inherited assets and was at high risk of being exploited. They, the loving and concerned family, were therefore petitioning the court to grant them full legal and financial control over my affairs, for my own protection. It was a brilliant, cynical strategy. They had taken my most powerful statement of truth, my declaration that the woman they knew was gone, and had twisted it into a medical diagnosis. They were trying to use my own pain, my own hard-won clarity, as the very weapon to have me declared insane. I read the entire document without a flicker of fear. The woman I had been 6 months ago would have been terrified. She would have been overwhelmed by the legalese, intimidated by the threat of a court battle. But that woman, as I had told them, was gone. I, Vivian Sterling, survivor, had been through a fire that had burned away all my fear. This legal battle was not a threat. It was simply the next chapter in my war for independence. And this time I was not going to fight it alone. I remembered my brother's letter. He had called this house a fortress. I was beginning to realize he had left me more than just walls of glass and cedar. He had left me an arsenal. I went into his office, a beautiful light-filled room with a commanding view of the ocean. It was, like the rest of the house, meticulously organized. Walter had been a man who believed in order, in the precise and logical arrangement of information. I had spent the past few weeks slowly, respectfully going through his belongings, but one piece of furniture had remained untouched, a large black 4-drawer file cabinet, tucked away in a corner. It was locked. I had assumed it contained old architectural blueprints or tax records. But now a new instinct, the gut feeling of a woman who was beginning to trust her own perceptions again, told me to look closer. On the simple keyring Walter had left for me among the keys for the doors in the mailbox was one small, ornate, antique-looking key that didn't seem to fit anything. I tried it in the lock of the file cabinet. It turned with a smooth, satisfying click. The top drawer slid open silently. It was filled with files, each one labeled in my brother's precise architectural script. And there, in the very front, was a file that made my breath catch in my throat. It was labeled simply, Vivian. My hands trembled as I lifted it out. It was thick, heavy with documents. I sat down at Walter's desk and opened it. It was not what I expected. It was not a collection of old family photos or sentimental letters. It was a complete, professionally executed private investigator's report, commissioned by my brother 5 years ago. The subject of the report, Marcus and Sasha Sterling. Walter, my quiet, private and fiercely protective older brother, had clearly shared my deep, unspoken mistrust of my son's life choices. He had not trusted the perfect, glittering facade of their life, and so he had done what a brilliant, wealthy and concerned man does. He had hired the best to find out the truth. The report was a devastating, methodical demolition of the life my son and his wife had pretended to have. It was all there, in black and white. Credit card statements detailing a lifestyle of staggering, reckless extravagance, records of multiple defaulted business loans under Sasha's name, A history of high-risk, catastrophic investments made by Marcus. They were living in a house of cards, a beautiful expensive illusion of wealth, while drowning in a sea of secret suffocating debt. The report detailed a luxury vacation to Bali that had coincided with my most brutal round of chemotherapy, a trip that had cost more than my entire teacher's salary for a year. It detailed Sasha's addiction to high-end designer clothes, a habit that had maxed out a dozen credit cards. It detailed my son's desperate, prideful attempts to keep up with his wife's ambitions, moving money between accounts, taking out secret loans, always one step ahead of financial ruin. They were not the successful, happy family they pretended to be. They were performers, playing a role, and their carefully constructed stage was about to collapse. This inheritance, I realized with a sickening clarity, was not just a windfall to them. It was a lifeline, a bailout, and they were willing to do anything, to destroy anyone, to get it. At the very back of the report was the business card of the private investigator Walter had hired. His name was Arthur Vance. The card was simple, elegant, and professional. I picked up the phone. I now had more than just my own testimony. I had the truth, meticulously documented and paid for by the brother who had been watching over me all along. The private investigator Arthur Vance was a man whose voice sounded exactly like I thought it would. A low, gravelly baritone, laced with the weary cynicism of a man who had seen the worst of human nature and was no longer surprised by any of it. When I introduced myself as Walter Bishop's sister, the cynicism in his voice was replaced by a tone of genuine, profound respect. "Walter was a good man," he said, his voice warming slightly. "One of the few clients I've had who was as smart as he was rich. He was worried about you, Mrs. Sterling. Deeply worried. He told me, my sister is a good, trusting woman and she is married to a world full of sharks. He wanted to make sure you were protected." I sat at my brother's desk. The damning report spread out before me, and I told Arthur Vance everything. The 3 years of silence, the miraculous, sudden appearance of my family on my doorstep, the 3 words I had spoken, and the conservatorship papers that now lay on the table beside the report. He listened without interruption, a series of quiet, affirmative grunts, the only sign he was still on the line. When I was finished, he was silent for a long moment. "They're predictable," he finally said, a note of professional satisfaction in his voice. "The greedy ones always are. Their playbook only has 1 page. When the charm doesn't work, attack. This conservatorship is a classic move. They're trying to legally erase you before you can expose them. Can they win?" I asked, my voice a whisper. "Not a chance in hell," he said, and for the first time I heard a flicker of something that sounded like enjoyment in his voice. "Not with what your brother left you. That report is a 5-year-old roadmap to their desperation. What we need now is to show their current state of mind, their motive. We need to prove that their loving concern was born on the exact day they discovered you were a wealthy woman." Arthur Vance, it turned out, was more than just a private investigator. He was a master strategist. He agreed to help me not just out of respect for my brother's memory, but I sensed, out of a deep professional love for the game. He saw Sasha and Marcus not as a threat but as a challenge, and he was a man who clearly loved to win. Over the next week we worked together with my newly hired lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman from Wilmington who specialized in estate litigation. Arthur, with his network of contacts and his mastery of the digital breadcrumbs people leave behind, began to build a powerful, irrefutable counter-narrative. He provided my lawyer with up-to-the-minute intelligence on my children's dire financial state. He uncovered 2 new, massive, and recently defaulted loans. He found proof that they had placed a down payment on a new, more extravagant house in a wealthier suburb of Atlanta, just 3 days after they had discovered my inheritance, a purchase they had no way of funding without my money. And the final damning piece of evidence. He found a record of a credit application for a multi-million-dollar personal line of credit, filed on the very day after their disastrous visit to my home, using my beach house as the proposed collateral. The trap was being set. My lawyer, armed with this mountain of evidence, devised our strategy. We would not fight their petition on the grounds of my competence alone. We would fight it on the grounds of their motive. We would not just defend, we would attack. On the advice of my legal team, I agreed to a formal deposition to assess my competency. But I insisted on one non-negotiable condition. It would not take place in a sterile lawyer's office in the city. It would take place here, in my home, in my fortress. I wanted them on my turf. I wanted them to face me in the very place they had tried to steal. The day of the deposition was a strange, surreal affair. My beautiful peaceful sanctuary was transformed into a legal battleground. A long mahogany table was brought in and set up in the vast living room. The panoramic view of the Atlantic Ocean, a stark, dramatic backdrop to the ugly human drama that was about to unfold. Sasha and Marcus arrived with their lawyer. A slick, overconfident man with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. They were dressed for victory. Sasha wore a sharp, tailored power suit, her face a mask of cool, professional concern. Marcus looked grim and determined, the dutiful son forced to take this unpleasant but necessary step. They walked into my home with an air of proprietary ownership, their eyes already measuring the space for their own furniture. They expected to face a confused, sick old woman they could easily manipulate and discredit. Their underestimation of me was my greatest weapon. The deposition began, as expected, with their lawyers' condescending, patronizing questions, each one designed to trip me up, to make me seem confused and unreliable. "Mrs. Sterling," he began, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "Can you tell us the date today?" "It is August 22nd, I replied calmly. "And your address here?" I recited it perfectly. He continued with a series of basic questions, his tone that of a man testing the cognitive abilities of a small child. I answered each one with the crisp, clear precision of the teacher I had once been. Then he moved to the heart of his case. "Mrs. Sterling," he said, leaning forward, "let's talk about the events of July 16th. Your son Marcus and his wife Sasha came to visit you here. Is that correct?" "They arrived on my property, yes," I said. "And when you saw them you failed to recognize them. Is that also correct?" "You asked your own son, 'Who are you?'" "That is what I said, yes," I replied. The lawyer gave a small triumphant smile to the court stenographer. "And you understand, Mrs. Sterling, how that might indicate a significant level of cognitive decline, a form of amnesia perhaps, brought on by your recent health struggles." I looked at him, at this smug, self-satisfied man, and then I looked at my son and his wife, and I let the mask of the calm, cooperative witness drop for just a moment. "Counselor," I said, my voice as cold and as sharp as ice, "I am a retired teacher with a master's degree in history. I can name for you, in chronological order, every king and queen of England since the Norman conquest. My cognitive abilities are not in question here. What is in question is the definition of the word family." I then turned my gaze on Marcus. "I answered your lawyer's question. Now I have one for you. Can you tell me the date of my hysterectomy in 2023? Can you tell me the name of my oncologist? Can you tell me the name of the chemotherapy drug that made me so sick I couldn't stand for a week?" He stared at me, his face blank, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. He knew none of it. "I see," I said, my voice quiet but carrying the weight of a judge's gavel. "You want to be granted control over my life, but you can't recall a single detail of my 3-year battle for it. That is not memory loss, counselor. That is a record of abandonment." The lawyer, flustered, tried to regain control, but the momentum in the room had shifted. It was now my lawyer's turn. She was a small, sharp woman with a mind like a steel trap, and she went to work with a quiet, surgical precision. She began by questioning my son. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice gentle, "you state in your petition that you are deeply concerned for your mother's well-being. Is that correct?" "Yes, of course," Marcus said, puffing out his chest. "And that concern is why you have been absent for the entirety of her 3-year battle with cancer." The question, so simple, so direct, hung in the air. Marcus stammered, talking about his work, about his own family, about not wanting to be a burden. His excuses under the bright, clarifying light of a legal deposition sounded as hollow and as pathetic as they were. Then, my lawyer turned to Sasha, and she brought out the ammunition my brother had left for me. She calmly, methodically presented them with the evidence from Walter's private investigator's report, credit card statements, bank records, loan applications. Each document was a nail in the coffin of their lie. She held up a statement. "Mrs. Sterling," she said to Sasha, "on May 10, 2024, while my client was in the intensive care unit following a major surgery, you and your husband were, according to this American Express statement, enjoying a $5,000 a night suite at the Four Seasons in Bali. Can you explain how that trip demonstrated your deep concern for your mother-in-law's health?" Sasha's face, which had been a mask of cool composure, began to crumble. She sputtered about a non-refundable ticket, about needing to get away from the stress. My lawyer wasn't finished. She then presented them with the new evidence. The evidence Arthur Vance had gathered. The down payment on the new house, The application for the line of credit, dated the day after their visit to me. The evidence of their financial motive was not just compelling, it was overwhelming and irrefutable. The legal ambush was a catastrophe for them. Their lawyer, a man who had clearly been fed the same story of their loving concern as everyone else, looked at the mountain of evidence, at his clients' pale, guilty faces, and he understood, he had been played. His case, his entire argument for their noble intentions, had been utterly and completely demolished. He asked for a recess. He and my children huddled in a corner of the vast living room, their whispered conversation a frantic, panicked hiss. When he returned to the table, his face was a grim mask of defeat. "Your Honor, ma'am," he stammered, addressing the court reporter. "My clients, after further consideration, wish to withdraw their petition for conservatorship at this time. They were surrendering. They were retreating in disgrace, but I wasn't finished." My lawyer looked at me and I gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "We are pleased to hear that," she said, her voice cold and clear. "However, you should inform your clients that we will be filing a countersuit against them for emotional distress, harassment, and the malicious filing of a fraudulent legal action. We will see you in court." The fallout was immediate and absolute. Their world, the beautiful glittering world they had built on a foundation of lies and debt, came crashing down. Faced with a costly legal battle they could not possibly win, and the public humiliation of having their greed and neglect exposed, they were ruined. Their lawyer dropped them. Their carefully curated circle of friends, smelling the stench of financial and social ruin, abandoned them. I won my countersuit. The court awarded me a significant judgment. Not that I ever expected to see a penny of it. But it wasn't about the money. It was about the truth. It was about accountability. It was about the official legal record stating that I, Vivian Sterling, was not the crazy one. They were. A year later, the beach house was no longer a fortress. It was a home. A true sanctuary filled not with the ghosts of a broken family, but with the warmth and laughter of a new one. My health was restored. The sea air and the hard-won peace a more powerful medicine than any chemotherapy. I had established a small private trust to protect my assets, ensuring that no one could ever again try to use my well-being as a legal loophole for their own enrichment. The final scene of my war was a quiet, beautiful one. It was a warm evening in late summer, the sun setting over the Atlantic, painting the sky in breathtaking shades of orange and violet. I was on the vast cedar deck of my home. The long, reclaimed wood table was set for a small, intimate dinner. My guests were not the family I had been born into, but the family I had chosen, the family that had been forged in the fire of my battle. Dr. Evans, my brilliant, compassionate oncologist, who had guided me through the darkest days with his wisdom and his kindness. Patricia, my favorite chemo nurse, whose warm smile and steady hand had been my lifeline. And two other women, Sarah and Maria, fellow cancer survivors I had met in the trenches of the infusion center. Our bond, a silent, powerful thing understood only by those who have walked the same fiery path. We sat on the deck, a small tribe of survivors, the sound of the ocean a constant, soothing presence. We drank wine, we ate good food, we talked and we laughed, our conversation easy and real. We did not talk about sickness, we talked about life, about second chances, about the profound, unexpected beauty of a simple, peaceful sunset. I looked at their faces illuminated by the soft glow of the candles, and I felt a sense of belonging so deep and so true it brought tears to my eyes. This was family, not blood, not obligation, but the quiet, unwavering love that shows up, no questions asked, and holds your hand in the dark. My brother had built me a sanctuary, but I had been the one to fill it with life. My old family had tried to steal my future, but in doing so they had given me a new one, a future more beautiful and more meaningful than any I could have ever imagined. I raised my glass to the darkening sky, to my brother's memory, to my new family, and to the quiet, unshakable strength of a woman who had been through hell and had come out the other side, not just alive but finally truly free.